"I know what you did," saw Sarah on her husband's cell phone. The cryptic message on the phone made her realize that all her trust had been broken. Chills ran down her spine, tears fell from her eyes, and she couldn't understand why her hands had started trembling. Sarah and Mark lived in a charming suburban neighborhood with tree-lined streets and friendly neighbors who waved hello every morning. Their home, a cozy two-story house with a well-tended garden, reflected their love and dedication to each other. The walls were adorned with photos of their many adventures, from hiking in the mountains to lazy beach vacations. With her warm smile and nurturing spirit, Sarah worked as a freelance graphic designer, while Mark, with his easygoing charm and quick wit, was an up-and-coming professional in the corporate world. Together, they formed a picture-perfect couple that friends admired and envied. Their daily routines were a testament to their strong bond and mutual support. Mornings began with shared coffee and quiet conversations at the breakfast table, planning their day and enjoying each other's company before the hustle and bustle all began. Sarah often spent her days working from her home studio, pausing occasionally to tend to their small vegetable garden or to take a leisurely walk around the neighborhood. Although she didn't want to brag about this fact, she belonged to a rich family, and her husband was the only person who knew about this. Her father owned land property near the countryside, and some of the land was named under Sarah by her father. On the other hand, Mark commuted to his downtown office, but always made it a point to text Sarah during his lunch break, sharing snippets of his day and reminding her of his love. Evenings were reserved for them to unwind, cook dinner, watch movies, or simply talk about their dreams and aspirations. Life took a turn when Mark landed a new job at a high-stress corporate firm. The opportunity was too good to pass up. Better pay, a prestigious title, and the promise of career advancement. However, it came with long hours, tight deadlines, and intense pressure. At first, Mark was excited and energized by the new challenge, but as weeks turned into months, the job began to take a toll on him. He became more tense and irritable. He had indulged in a constant state of stress. Sarah noticed the change immediately. Their hugs became non-existent, and Sarah started relying on the doorbell to wait for her husband every day. Mark, who once came home with a smile and a story to tell, now returned exhausted, often retreating to his study without much to say. Their evening routines changed drastically. The dinners that used to be a time for connection became silent affairs, with Mark too preoccupied to engage in conversation. Sarah tried to be supportive, offering to help with whatever she could and suggesting relaxation techniques, but nothing seemed to alleviate his tension. One peculiar habit that Sarah found increasingly troubling was Mark's newfound fascination with violent videos. Late at night, she would find him in the living room, staring intensely at graphic scenes of brutality and chaos. When she questioned him about it, he shrugged it off, saying it helped him relax after a stressful day. Sarah wanted to believe him, attributing it to the pressures of his job. But deep down, she felt a growing unease. She knew that something was odd and fishy. The man she loved was changing before her eyes, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. But the next day, something happened. Sarah's mouth turned up into a smile when she saw her dear husband handing her a huge paper bag. Taking a closer look, Sarah noticed some expensive brand names written on the very right corner of the bag. Raising her eyebrows, she stared at Mark in confusion. He rolled his eyes and shoved the bag towards her. Inside, besides a pretty dress, there was an invitation. A beautiful dress paired with a set of gorgeous heels. But it was the last thing that Sarah cared about. Sarah felt distant in her own home with her own husband. Today was the annual neighborhood party, always a highlight for Sarah and Mark. It was a time when everyone came together, sharing laughter, food, and stories under the warm glow of string lights. This year was no different, and despite the recent strain on their relationship, Sarah hoped the party would provide a brief respite for Mark. They arrived hand in hand, attempting to showcase a united front despite the underlying tension and stress. The evening was in full swing when the unexpected happened. Sirens blared and police cars pulled up to the curb, causing confusion and concern among the partygoers. Officers stepped out, making a beeline for Mark, who was chatting with neighbors by the grill. The sudden attention on him caused a hush to fall over the crowd. An officer approached with handcuffs in his hands, and without much explanation, Mark was placed under arrest. The scene was surreal, and Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. "Sarah, you need to leave now," Mark said urgently as he was being led away, his voice firm but laced with desperation. Confused and panicked, Sarah did as he instructed, slipping through the crowd and making her way home. Her mind raced with questions and with fear, not knowing what to think or who to turn to. Walking back to their house felt endless, every step weighed down by dread. Once home, Sarah immediately wanted to call someone for help, anybody, but her phone was in her bag, and she had left that behind in all the chaos. Thanks to her wittiness, she remembered her husband had installed an emergency phone in the garage because of a past mishap. She decided to head to the garage, hoping to find some sense of normalcy and familiar surroundings. As she approached, a strange, unsettling feeling began to creep over her. Pushing the door open, she saw a sight that made her blood run cold. There, lying motionless on the cold concrete floor, was a body. It took a moment for her to recognize the lifeless figure as one of Mark's co-workers. The realization hit her like a freight train. Her initial shock was compounded when she noticed a distinctive birthmark on the woman's neck. It was the same unique mark Sarah had on her own body. Memories of her parents telling her about her missing sister who shared this birthmark flooded back. She felt a wave of nausea as she connected the dots. The dead woman in her garage was her long-lost sister, a sister she never knew she had, but had always wondered about. Sarah's mind was racing 100 miles an hour. She was in a state of disbelief, of shock. How had her sister ended up here? Why was she dead? And what did Mark have to do with any of this? As she stood over the lifeless body, the enormity of the situation sank in, leaving her paralyzed with fear and grief. She knew her life was about to change in ways that she could never have imagined, and the safe, happy world she once knew was now shattered beyond repair. Sarah wanted to scream or run, but she stood frozen in the garage, her eyes fixated on the lifeless body of her sister, and her mind began to flood with memories from her childhood. She remembered the hushed conversations between her parents about a baby they had lost, a twin sister she had never met. The birthmark, a unique crescent shape just below her collarbone, was a distinct family trait. Her parents had often talked about how they would recognize her by that mark if they ever found her. Seeing it now on the body in front of her was both a happy confirmation and a cruel twist of fate. The realization was like a punch to the gut. Sarah's legs felt weak as she stumbled backward, gripping the doorframe for support. She recalled the pain and sorrow in her parents' voices whenever they mentioned the lost sister, always tinged with hope that she might one day return to the family. The birthmark was their beacon, a symbol of the connection that they had never let go of. And here it was, stark and undeniable, but accompanied by a devastating truth. Her sister was dead, and the circumstances were far more sinister than she could have ever imagined. In the chaos of the moment, another happening surfaced. It was a haunting whisper that now echoed in her mind with chilling clarity. Before taking her last breath, she managed to say a single name: Mark. The whisper was weak, barely audible, but unmistakable. Sarah had been too shocked to process it fully at the time, but now the pieces were falling into place with terrifying precision. Her husband, the man she loved and trusted, was somehow involved in her sister's death. The weight of the revelation pressed down on her, making it hard to breathe. She replayed every interaction, every conversation she had with Mark over the past few months, searching for signs that she might have missed. His erratic behavior, the tension, the violent videos, everything now seemed to point to a dark secret that he'd been hiding. Sarah's mind raced as she tried to reconcile the loving husband she knew with the man who might have committed such a heinous act. The duality was incomprehensible, leaving her in a state of shock and disbelief. Sarah's hands trembled as she pulled out her phone, intending to call the police. But then doubt crept in. Mark was there with her at the party. How could he do this? What if there was an explanation? What if Mark was being framed or blackmailed? Her heart ached with conflicting emotions, love for her husband, grief for her sister, and a burning need for the truth. She couldn't act impulsively. She needed to understand the full scope of what had happened. Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she stood there, grappling with her emotions. She knew she had to confront Mark, but fear held her back. What if he lied? What if he became violent? The man she thought she knew had already proven to be somebody entirely different. She needed to find a way to get the truth from him, to make him confront the reality of what he had done. But first, she needed to gather her strength and resolve. This was not just about justice for her sister, but about finding out who her husband truly was. Determined, Sarah wiped her tears and took a deep breath. She had to be smart and careful. She couldn't let her emotions cloud her judgment. Her next steps would be crucial in unraveling the mystery and bringing peace to her shattered family. With a final glance at her sister's body, she steeled herself for the confrontation ahead, vowing to uncover the truth, no matter how painful it might be. As Sarah stood in her living room, her mind spinning from the discovery in the garage, she suddenly remembered something odd she had stumbled upon a few weeks ago. Mark's study had always been a private space, a sanctuary where he could work undisturbed. One day, while looking for a document, she found a phone hidden in the back of a drawer. She had dismissed it as an old, forgotten device at the time, but now, in the light of recent events, its presence took on a more sinister significance. Rushing to the study, Sarah retrieved the phone and powered it on. Her heart raced as she navigated through the messages, hoping to find answers. Among the mundane texts and notifications, one message stood out. It was from an unknown number and simply read, "I know what you did." The cryptic message sent chills down her spine. It was clear that Mark had been hiding something dark enough to warrant blackmail. Her mind raced as she pieced together the fragments of the puzzle. Mark's erratic behavior, the tension at work, the arrest, and this message all pointed to a deep, disturbing secret. Determined to get to the bottom of this, Sarah knew she had to confront Mark. Visiting him in jail was not something she looked forward to, but it was necessary. She needed to hear the truth from him directly, to understand what had driven him to such extremes. The following morning, she made her way to the police station, her heart heavy with a mix of dread and resolve. As she waited in the cold, sterile visiting room, she rehearsed her questions, bracing herself for whatever revelations may lay ahead. When Mark finally appeared, his appearance shocked her. He looked haggard, a shadow of the man she once knew. The spark in his eyes was gone, replaced by a haunted, defeated look. As they sat across from each other, the barrier felt more than physical. Sarah didn't waste any time. "Mark, I found the phone. I saw the message. Who sent it? What did they know?" Her voice trembled, but her resolve was firm. With a deep, stark intake, she finally blew the trumpet. "Did you kill her?" "Please say no," is what her heart wanted to shout. But what she heard instead was the truth. Mark's shoulders slumped, and he let out a heavy sigh. "It was Rebecca," he said, referring to his coworker. "She discovered something from my past, something I thought was forever buried. She threatened to expose me unless I did what she wanted. That night, I went to confront her, but things got out of hand. It was an accident, Sarah. I didn't mean to kill her." His voice cracked, and tears welled up in his eyes. Sarah felt a mix of anger and sorrow. "An accident?" She whispered your name, Mark. She was terrified. What could be so terrible that she had to die for it? She demanded. Mark's confession hung in the air, a heavy, oppressive truth that seemed to suffocate the room. He explained that he had been involved in a fraudulent crime years ago, something he had managed to keep hidden. Rebecca had discovered this and used it against him. The confrontation had escalated, and in a moment of panic, he had struck her, resulting in her death. As the weight of Mark's confession sank in, Sarah's heart ached for her sister, for the life that was lost, and for the man she thought she knew. The reality was devastating, but she knew she had to see this through to the end. Mark's actions had shattered their lives, and there would be no easy way forward. The truth was out, but the journey to justice and healing was just beginning. Sarah left the police station with a heavy heart, determined to honor her sister's memory and find a way to rebuild her life from the ruins of this tragedy. The man she loved had just confessed to killing her sister, albeit unintentionally. Mark's explanation of blackmail and an accidental death didn't absolve him of the crime in her eyes. And yet, despite everything, a part of her still loved him. Their history, their shared moments of joy and pain, couldn't be easily dismissed. The bond they had was real, but now it was tainted by betrayal and blood. She felt trapped between the weight of her love for him and the unrelenting demand for justice for her sister. The days that followed were torturous for Sarah. She couldn't sleep, her dreams plagued by images of her sister and the horror that she must have felt in her final moments. Every corner of her room, once filled with warmth and love, now felt like a crime scene. She couldn't escape the suffocating reality that the person she trusted most had brought such darkness into her life. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw Rebecca's face and felt the sting of betrayal anew. Sarah knew that she had to make a decision. Forgiving Mark seemed impossible, but the thought of seeking revenge felt equally unbearable. She wanted justice for her sister, but she also dreaded the thought of condemning Mark to a life in prison. The conflict tore at her, leaving her emotionally paralyzed. As she walked through the quiet streets back to their home, Sarah replayed the events in her mind. The birthmark on her sister's body, the whispered name, the hidden phone with its cryptic message. All of it pointed to a deliberate cover-up by Mark. He might have been blackmailed, but he chose to confront Rebecca alone, escalating the situation to a deadly conclusion. To Sarah, everything started making sense. But something seemed troubling. The conclusion Sarah came up with was just right, perhaps a little too perfect to be the truth. Every clue and every trace made sense when it shouldn't have. Sarah knew Mark wasn't too naive to leave behind such obvious evidence, but he wasn't that sharp either to hide every clue. Sarah was sure there would be something else too. She knew Mark wasn't so keen on letting her organize his clothes or even near his cupboard since he joined the new company. She also knew it was a bad sign, so she started searching his cupboard and opened all of his drawers and emptied his shoe shelf, but nothing was worth a chance. Then suddenly her eyes landed on a black box. Upon opening it, her eyes widened, adrenaline rushed, and she was covered in cold sweat almost instantly. No, it wasn't a dead mouse, but a crumpled female collar shirt. It was pink, and Sarah didn't own a single pink shirt because Mark had once mentioned he hated that color. Suddenly, Sarah faintly remembered seeing Rebecca wearing a similar shirt and how she remembered that she liked it so much. Sarah immediately picked it up and smelled the shirt. The scent was strange, almost too familiar. She realized that she'd been smelling this kind of perfume from Mark for quite a long time, but she didn't bother to put her focus on such a little scent. But what she couldn't understand was how a different woman's shirt was hidden safely in her once loving husband's closet. To tell the truth, Sarah had an idea of the reason by now, but she just didn't want to admit that her husband was cheating on her finally. She stood still, trying to connect the dots, when suddenly her hand landed in her front pocket and found a phone. Her eyes scanned the call log, stopping at the very latest dialed number. Her heart raced as she realized the number, or whom it belonged to, could be the proof that she needed. With trembling hands, Sarah dialed the number and waited for an answer. A smooth, feminine voice picked up. "Mark? Why the hell are you calling me?" She seemed angry. "Look, whatever happened was your fault. You shouldn't have been so close to her. You know I didn't like her. Stop calling me." The woman hung up. Sarah's heart shattered into a million pieces, but Sarah kept up the courage and tried to track her location, which she learned in her college years, not knowing it would help her today. A few hours later, Sarah arrived at that location with hands trembling and face covered with tears because it was the company Mark worked at. With the voice recorder hidden in her bag, Sarah noticed a posh lady standing near the reception. In contrast to Sarah, this woman was beautiful. She had on red lipstick and her hair was tied in a tight updo. Sarah noticed her crystal clear skin and her manicured nails. She was something Sarah wished to be like, but an eerie feeling made Sarah approach her. But as soon as she reached her, Sarah recognized the floral perfume that she wore. No, it wasn't Sarah's favorite, but rather the one she smelled from that pink shirt. Sarah, with the recorder on, introduced herself and asked her name in return. Amanda Byers, she replied. But Sarah's next question made that constant smile on the lady's face go by so quickly that it seemed like she'd never seen a dead body in front of her. Who's Mark? Sarah took the hidden phone out of her bag and showed it to the lady her husband was cheating on her with. Amanda hesitantly tried to cover the situation by becoming a stranger, but it couldn't help. Sarah's one-to-one questions left her in complete shock as she asked about the hidden shirt. Caught off guard, she stumbled over her words before confessing to the affair and Mark promising her to give her Sarah's property. Sarah's eyes locked onto the lady, but she didn't know what to feel. Anger due to her husband cheating on her, or disappointment because of her husband's greediness over her property. In the end, it was her sister's memory that guided her. Rebecca had been an innocent victim caught in a web of deceit and violence. She deserved justice, and Sarah couldn't let her death be in vain. With a heavy heart, she gathered all the evidence that she had. She knew that going to the police would mean the end of her marriage and the shattering of the life that she had built, but it was a necessary step to ensure that justice was served. With the evidence she needed, Sarah rushed to the police station in a complete state of shock and disbelief. She was walking so fast that she could feel the heat beneath her feet. After reaching the station, Sarah began to tell every minor and major detail that she remembered. Detective James listened intently as Sarah handed over the recorder and explained the situation. He assured her that they would take swift action. Throughout it all, Sarah was consumed by a mix of grief and guilt. She questioned her own judgment, wondering how she had missed the signs of Mark's duplicity. So she had a last meeting with her husband. She wanted to scream, shout, or even slap him, but all she could do was cry. Seeing her cry somehow made a change in Mark's behavior, because the next day, when Amanda was arrested and brought in for questioning, Mark's eyes went wide and he crumbled under pressure, revealing Amanda to be the real murderer. Although Sarah couldn't believe it, every clue, every trace, and every piece of evidence started making even more sense. The answer to why Rebecca's shirt had Amanda's scent and why Rebecca whispered Mark's name in her last breath was unveiled. She knew about his affair and wanted to tell Sarah, but Amanda killed her because of Sarah's property. The day of the sentencing was a cold, gray morning. Sarah sat in the courtroom, her hands clenched in her lap, as the judge read the verdict. Mark was found guilty as an accomplice to murder and sentenced to a lengthy prison term. He looked at Sarah one last time, his eyes filled with regret and sorrow, but she couldn't bring herself to meet his gaze. The man she had once loved was now a complete stranger to her, someone capable of unthinkable things. After the trial, Sarah visited her sister's grave. It was a peaceful spot, nestled under a large oak tree. She stood there, her mind a swirl of emotions. She spoke softly to Rebecca, apologizing for not being able to protect her and promising to honor her memory. The pain of losing her sister was immense, but Sarah also felt a glimmer of relief. Justice had been served, and Rebecca could finally rest in peace. The weeks following the trial were a whirlwind of emotions and adjustments for Sarah. She had to move out of the house that she and Mark had shared, unable to bear the memories that haunted every room. She found a small apartment on the other side of town, modest but comforting in its simplicity. The move symbolized a fresh start, a necessary step in her journey toward healing. She brought with her only the essentials, leaving behind anything that reminded her too much of the life that she once had. In her new space, Sarah dedicated herself to honoring Rebecca's memory. She volunteered at a local women's shelter, offering her skills as a graphic designer to help with their outreach programs. The work was fulfilling and gave her a sense of purpose to continue her path of healing and of self-discovery. And so the story closed, not with an end, but with a beginning. Once shattered, Sarah's life was slowly being rebuilt, piece by piece, painted with the colors of hope and a future filled with possibilities. She had found her path forward, stronger and more resilient than ever before.